He stood in my kitchen, eyes blazing, voice flat. "You'll regret cutting off your own son." 7 years of silent sacrifice, and now he was serving me legal papers on my birthday. The envelope shook in his hand. Mine didn't. "Go ahead," I said, setting the teacup down, "but bring every receipt." That's when my son realized. His mother kept everything. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The voicemail started like so many before it. Fast, slurred, urgent. But this one had a serrated edge. "You're unbelievable, Mom. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? You've become dead weight, and I'm tired of dragging you along." I sat in my kitchen, coffee going cold in my hands, staring at the blinking red light on my landline. I didn't play it again. I didn't need to. His words echoed louder than any machine. Dead weight. 7 years. I'd covered his rent for 7 years, never missed a month, and when I finally said no, he said I was useless. I looked around at the signs of all the ways I'd downsized to keep up his lifestyle. My dining room set, gone, replaced with a 2-person fold-out table from a garage sale. My vacation fund, emptied 3 Christmases ago to fix his radiator. And my shoes. I hadn't bought new walking shoes since 2019. The heels were soft from wear, but I wore them anyway. Bryce always needed something more. It had started small, like most things do. His roommate skipped town. Could I cover the difference for a month? Then it was a medical bill, then a deposit on a new apartment. By the 3rd year, I stopped keeping track. Not because I didn't care, but because part of me didn't want to know the number. Not really. I'd tell people I was just helping him get on his feet. What I didn't say was that those feet never seemed to touch the ground. Just 2 days before the voicemail, he'd called, said he needed another $2,000. Rent again. But I'd hesitated this time. I told him gently that things were tight, that retirement wasn't what I expected, that groceries cost more now, and the electric bill had spiked with the last cold snap. He paused, then scoffed. "Right, because the woman who used to bring snacks to the entire ER can't spot her own kid a little help." I didn't yell. I didn't explain. I simply said no. The silence was short, but it felt final. Then came the voicemail. Dead weight. I didn't cry. Not then. Not right away. Instead, I opened my filing cabinet and pulled out a battered accordion folder with peeling edges and a faint scent of lemon cleaner. I hadn't touched it in years. I flipped past my own retirement paperwork, past George's death certificate, God, 8 years now, and stopped at the dusty green tab labeled Bryce's Support, 2016 to present. The label felt almost sterile, detached, like it belonged in an archive, not my kitchen. I opened it. Inside were neatly clipped stacks of bank statements, copies of wire transfers, printed Venmo confirmations, and handwritten notes to myself on yellow legal pads. Covered rent again. He promised it's the last time. Car broke down, $1,100 for repairs. Declined trip to see Susan. ER copay. He didn't have insurance. Canceled my dental cleaning. Every number bled into the next. Thousands. Tens of thousands. A resume of sacrifice. I ran my fingers across the ink. Each line had once felt like love. Now it looked like a receipt. My chest felt heavy, but not from grief, from clarity. The son I'd raised with lullabies and pancakes had turned me into a silent investor in a life I wasn't invited to anymore. The doorbell rang, but I didn't move. Let it ring. I picked up a red pen and wrote a new date in the margin. March 3rd, the day I said no. A day I didn't give in. A day I finally counted myself in the equation. The folder sat on the table like a loaded weapon. My heart thudded behind my ribs. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but for the first time in years, I knew what I wasn't going to do. I wasn't going to disappear for someone who only noticed me when the check didn't clear. I wasn't going to be dead weight. I hadn't touched the envelope in years. It was sealed tight with the kind of tape you use when you know you're going to lie to yourself. But I was done lying. I slit the flap open with the edge of a butter knife and pulled out a stack of records so thick they fanned out like a deck of guilt. The first sheet was from February 2016, $1,325 wired to Bryce's landlord in Pittsburgh. He'd just moved out there for a job he lost 6 weeks later. Toxic workplace, he'd said. I'll find something better. I paid that month, then the next. Then I stopped counting. I sat at the kitchen table under the flickering ceiling light, paper after paper crinkling under my fingers. Rent, food delivery receipts when he was too depressed to cook. Uber rides to interviews, $2,480 for a dental crown because he didn't want to walk into a second date looking like a junkyard. Every figure punched a hole in my stomach. I could smell the old carpet in my hallway, the one I hadn't replaced because it still worked. I could hear the humming of my ancient fridge that cycled louder than the news at night, and I could feel the dent in my mattress where the springs had given up, but I hadn't. There was one line item from 2019, $3,200 for emergency car repairs. That one pulled me under. I remembered sitting on the edge of the exam table at the orthopedic clinic that winter, waiting for the doctor to tell me if I'd need surgery for my knee. I had declined the MRI because I didn't have the deductible money. Bryce had needed his car to get to a startup pitch. He never got the funding. I never got the MRI. I turned the page. $175. Therapist copay, March 2020, $64. DoorDash, hangover breakfast, $800. Rent, again? My stomach twisted. Jesus, Helen, came a voice behind me. I looked up to see Carol in the doorway, holding a casserole dish wrapped in a plaid kitchen towel. She'd let herself in, like always. Is that all, Bryce? She asked, eyeing the papers like they were evidence in a trial. All of it, I said. Every month, every favor. Carol set the dish down with a firm thunk. If he's gonna treat you like a bank, she muttered, you might as well charge interest. I let out a dry laugh, but it snagged in my throat. I'm serious, she said, sitting across from me. You've paid off more than some ex-husbands. I picked up one of the statements, still warm from my hand. It's not even about the money anymore. It's about how invisible I've made myself to keep him afloat. She reached for my hand. You know what makes you visible? Saying no and meaning it. I nodded, but a numbness spread through me like cold water. I couldn't cry. Not yet. That night I poured myself a glass of Merlot, pulled out a spiral-bound notebook, and began to write. 2016. You lost your job. I paid rent. You said thank you. 2017. You broke your tooth. I paid the dentist. You said it was temporary. 2018. You crashed your car. I paid insurance. You said I saved your life. Line after line, I laid out the years like obituaries of my boundaries. It was part diary, part confession, part math. When I looked at the total I had roughly calculated, my heart jerked. Over $54,000. That didn't count gas money, groceries, emotional currency. I closed the notebook, wrote one last line in ink so sharp it bled through the paper. This is the cost of unconditional love. My phone buzzed. I flipped it over. Venmo request, Bryce, $875. Apology rent due. The message sat like a bruise on my screen. No context, no apology, just due. The Venmo request sat in my notifications like a demand letter dressed up in emojis. Apology rent due. No message, no softening language. Just an amount and a deadline, like I was some forgetful accountant who'd missed payroll. I didn't respond right away. I reread it twice, hoping I'd misinterpreted it, hoping he meant it as a joke. But Bryce had lost the tone of humor months ago. Now everything was soaked in resentment. I sent a message. Bryce, I'm sorry, but I can't keep doing this. My finances are tighter than you think. I love you, but I need to take care of myself too. 3 dots. Then nothing. Then, suddenly, they vanished. He wasn't typing anymore. A new message blinked in. Tighter? You're retired. You sit on your ass all day. What do you even need money for? I read it out loud. The words tasted metallic like blood. Another one came in seconds later. You're being dramatic. I've supported you emotionally since Dad died. You owe me more than money. There it was. That word again. Owe. I stared at the thread. Each message felt colder than the last, like he was stripping me for parts. When Bryce was a teenager, he was a storm of charm. After my husband died, he became the golden child by default. The house got quieter, smaller. I worked double shifts at the hospital and came home to a boy who wanted praise but never gave thanks. I didn't notice it then, not really. I mistook it for grief. I told myself he was hurting, same as me. But now, sitting on my sagging living room couch with the blinds drawn and my phone in my lap, I saw the pattern with painful clarity. He never asked. He expected. And when I said no, he treated it like betrayal. I deleted the Venmo request. No ceremony, no explanation. I just tapped decline and turned my phone face down on the table. 2 hours later, when I checked again, Bryce had blocked me. Texts went green. Voicemail rang once, then clicked off. I half laughed, a short, brittle sound. That's all it took? 7 years of rent, groceries, bailing him out of situations, and he ghosted me over a single declined payment. A knock at the door jolted me. Carol stepped in without waiting, like always. She was carrying a tote bag full of Trader Joe's snacks and a bottle of cheap white wine. "You look like you just found out your cat talks," she said, kicking off her shoes. "He blocked me," I said, holding up my phone. Carol's face didn't even flinch. "Good, now you can finally breathe." "It hurts more than I thought it would," I admitted. She didn't say I was being dramatic. She didn't tell me to make peace. She just sat down beside me and opened the wine. "Have you ever thought about talking to a financial advisor?" she asked between sips. "I mean, what if you stopped planning around him?" I looked at her like she'd just pitched skydiving. "You mean, plan for me?" She nodded. "Yes, exactly that." It sounded simple, obvious even, but something about it cracked me open. The next morning, I made an appointment with a local advisor. I didn't even know what I'd ask yet. I just knew it was time to start imagining a future where my son wasn't the biggest line item in my life. But Bryce, he wasn't done. That night, Carol texted me a screenshot, a Facebook post. Bryce's profile picture above a status filled with spite. "It's always your own mom who abandons you first. Remember that when she pretends to be a victim. Some of us never had a choice." The next day I visited the bank. Banks smell sterile. Cold metal and printer ink and some artificial citrus that's supposed to feel welcoming. It didn't. Not to me. I sat across from the financial advisor with my purse clutched like a flotation device, wondering how I'd gotten here. 65, alone, and suddenly unrecognizable to my own son. The advisor's name was Lacey, mid-30s, efficient but kind-eyed. She typed while I talked, nodding in that quiet, professional rhythm that made you feel halfway seen. "I'd like to review all shared accounts," I told her, "and anything where my son, Bryce, is listed as a beneficiary." She didn't flinch, just tapped at her keyboard. "We can start with checking and retirement-linked portfolios. Do you remember when the beneficiary info was last updated?" I thought back, trying to pull the memory from fog. "Maybe 10 years ago?" "My husband handled most of it before he passed." She nodded again and began pulling up documents. A few clicks in, her expression shifted. Just slightly. Her brows lifted, eyes sharpening behind her glasses. "There are 2 accounts, small but active, that still have your son listed. One's a joint high-yield savings. The other is a survivor-designated CD. Do you still want him listed?" I looked at the screen. Bryce's name glared back at me like a watermark burned into every decision I'd made since his father died. I hadn't remembered leaving him on anything, but there he was, ready to inherit, even as he blocked my number and posted about my abandonment. Lacey leaned in slightly. "I don't mean to overstep, but I've seen this turn into probate battles. Removing him now could prevent that, especially if there's tension." There was tension. There was a crack running through the foundation of my entire relationship with my only child, and I had finally stopped pretending it wasn't there. I hesitated. My hand twitched toward the pen. He won't understand, I murmured. Maybe not, she said gently, but legally, you're not required to make him your heir, especially if he's been unkind, I finished. He's been cruel. Silence settled between us. Then I signed. Both forms, one after the other, and when I did, something inside me clicked loose. Not a clean break, more like a slow unwinding of a knot I'd been carrying in my chest for years. Guilt bloomed immediately, but there was power in it too. He'll hate me for this, I said. Lacey gave me a half smile. Then maybe he already did. Back at home, I expected to sit in silence with my regret, but instead there was Carol, standing in my kitchen wearing a paper party hat and holding a small lemon cake. You didn't think I forgot your birthday, did you? She grinned. I blinked, startled. Carol, I brought wine too, the cheap kind. It's what birthdays deserve. She had set the table with mismatched plates and one candle that kept tipping sideways. The house was warm, lit with golden light from the setting sun, and the kind of laughter that only happens when someone knows you're worst and still shows up. We were 3 bites into the cake when a knock shattered the evening. Carol paused, fork midair. I moved slowly toward the door, heart thudding like it had something to say. I opened it. Bryce stood on the porch. He looked clean-shaven, calm, like someone who knew the stage and had rehearsed his lines. A paper bag in one hand, a smug, familiar tilt to his mouth. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, stepping over the threshold without waiting. "I'm here to collect what I'm owed." I froze. Carol stood up behind me, jaw clenched. Bryce set the bag on the kitchen counter with a flourish. "Don't worry, I'm not here for cake. I'm here for my share." I stood by the sink, dish towel in hand, heart leaping into my throat. Carol froze with a piece of cake halfway to her mouth. The birthday candle sputtered out in the middle of the silence. Bryce marched straight to the table, dropped a manila envelope between the plates, and said, "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to settle." "Settle?" I echoed, still breathless from the shock. "You're sitting on equity that belongs to me," he said, like a man who'd rehearsed this sentence 100 times in the mirror. 7 years of support entitles me to compensation. Carol stood up slowly, fork clinking against her plate. "You're not serious." He ignored her, looked right at me. "I've spoken to someone, a legal advisor. We're not filing yet. This is a draft, an opportunity to resolve things quietly." I reached for the envelope with trembling hands. The paper felt heavy, like it carried more than just words. Inside, a document titled Letter of Intent to Claim Equitable Ownership. Paragraphs of legal jargon swirled around one central, galling assertion that Bryce believed he had rights to my condo based on ongoing emotional investment and uncompensated contributions to household well-being. "You didn't live here," I whispered. "I didn't need to. I helped you financially." "No," I snapped. "I helped you every month for 7 years." He folded his arms. "You gave willingly. That doesn't erase my emotional labor." Carol barked a short, humorless laugh. "Emotional labor? You guilt-tripped her into being your ATM." His eyes narrowed. "This isn't your business. She's my friend, and she's not alone anymore." Carol reached for her phone. "Leave, Bryce, or I'm calling the police." For a second, he hesitated, his jaw clenched, the smirk faded, and something raw flickered in his eyes. But then he shoved his hands in his coat pockets, turned to me, and said loud enough for the neighbors to hear, "You'll regret this. You're not untouchable." Then he was gone. Door slammed, candle snuffed out by the rush of wind behind him. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was scorched. I sat down slowly, hands still clutching the edge of the envelope. I wanted to cry, but the tears refused. My body had learned to hold them back from too many years of being strong. Carol sat beside me, her voice softer now. "We need a lawyer, a real estate one. This isn't just some tantrum. He's escalating." I nodded but couldn't speak. My hands ached from gripping the paper so hard. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the way he looked at me. Cold, entitled, transactional, like a man inspecting property he already thought he owned. By morning, I knew I had to begin sorting through everything, not just paperwork, history. I wandered into his old room. It hadn't changed much. Same crooked shelves, same posters peeling from thumbtacks. The air smelled like forgotten teenage years, dust and carpet cleaner and faint cologne. I stood there, trying to remember when he was last just my son, before the anger, before the entitlement. I pulled open the desk drawer. Empty. But when I looked up, I noticed something on the mirror, a yellow post-it note curling at the corners. Scrawled in thick black Sharpie, in his familiar messy handwriting, were the words, "When she's gone, it's all mine." My breath caught, my legs gave a little. I had to steady myself on the dresser. Not if, when. He had already planned for my exit, like I was a temporary inconvenience, a ticking clock to his inheritance. If he had a plan for my death, I needed one for my life. One that didn't include him in any sentence that began with inheritance. By noon the next day, I was sitting across from a woman named Layla Nash, estate attorney, sharp bob, sharper voice. Her office smelled like eucalyptus and seriousness. She wore black on black, no jewelry, no distractions. "Let's talk about your will," she said, clicking her pen. "And what kind of damage prevention we're aiming for." I laid it all out. The years of support, the threats, the letter of intent, the post-it. I didn't sugarcoat a word. She nodded once. "You're not overreacting." "I'm not reacting," I told her. "I'm correcting." We rewrote everything. Power of attorney, medical directive, asset allocation. My niece Anna, not Bryce, would handle everything now if something happened to me. The condo, my retirement accounts, even the furniture. It all went into a new living trust under my full control. "People think a will is protection," Layla said. "But a living trust? That's the real shield. Quiet, airtight, and harder to contest." The air outside her office was cooler, cleaner. I hadn't realized how tightly my body had been clenched until I stepped into that parking lot and exhaled for the first time in weeks. That evening, I told Carol everything. She listened over her usual mug of Earl Grey, eyebrows rising higher with every sentence. "I've got someone you should meet," she said. "Her name's Trina, realtor, tough as nails, just in case." "Just in case?" Carol didn't flinch. "Just in case you decide it's time to let that condo go before he tries to put a lien on your soul." I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. The next day I started cleaning, not out of panic, but with purpose. Closet by closet, drawer by drawer. I boxed up things I hadn't touched in years, old medical files, expired warranties, my son's 4th grade report card with a B+ circled in red. And then I found it, tucked inside an old shoebox beneath George's fishing gear, his journal. I almost didn't open it. I wasn't sure I wanted to. But I did. His handwriting looked the same as it did on our grocery lists and birthday cards, loopy and full of little arrows. But the words were heavier. Bryce knows how to twist things. I see it in the way he talks to Helen, like she owes him something for breathing. I love my son, but I don't trust him. Not with money, not with her. If anything ever happens to me, I hope she knows she can say no. I sat on the floor with that journal in my lap for over an hour. Tears came this time. Quiet, ashamed, but also freeing. George had seen what I'd refused to. He'd just written it down instead of saying it out loud. Later that night, while I was brushing my teeth, my phone buzzed on the sink. A message from Bryce. "Found a lawyer who'll get me what I deserve. Hope you're ready to lose everything." I stared at the screen, toothbrush frozen midair. Lose everything. He had no idea what I'd already protected, what I'd already rebuilt. And if this new lawyer of his wanted a fight, I had a plan. And this time it wasn't built on guilt, it was built on proof. In the evening, a call came from my cousin Irene in Florida. "Helen, honey, are you all right? We saw Bryce's post. I didn't want to believe it, but if you're really slipping, we can help. No shame in needing—" I nearly dropped the phone. "What post?" I asked, heart thudding in my chest. She hesitated. "It's a fundraiser. GoFundMe. He said you're not lucid anymore, that you revoked his access to your finances out of paranoia, that you think he's out to get you." I clicked off the call and opened my browser. And there it was, a campaign titled, "Help a Son Care for His Declining Mother." Banner image, a photo of me from 3 years ago where I looked tired after a night shift, my hair a mess, eyes swollen, jaw slack in mid-sentence. The description was worse. "My mom has early-stage dementia. She's forgotten how much I've helped her over the years. Rent, groceries, home upkeep. She cut me off suddenly and won't let me visit. I'm raising money to take legal action and eventually provide her with safe, compassionate care before things get worse." He'd raised nearly $1,500 in 3 days. I scrolled through the comments. "Praying for you, man. So sorry you're going through this. Donated. Moms deserve better." Each word felt like another stone being stacked on my chest. Carol stormed over within the hour. "I saw it," she said before I could speak. "He's going full public relations warfare." "I'm not letting this slide," I said, jaw tight. "Not this time." Together, we sat down and compiled everything: bank statements, email chains, text messages with timestamps, photocopies of the trust and will revisions, even Bryce's venomous text, "Hope you're ready to lose everything." "This is your ammo," Carol said, sliding it into a folder. "Let's use it." I didn't go on Facebook. I didn't go live or blast my side of the story across timelines. That's not who I am. But I did draft a quiet reply, one that didn't stoop, just stood. Carol helped me post it on my profile and I set it to public. "My son has chosen to paint me in a way that fits his narrative. I am of sound mind. I have legal counsel, documentation, and 7 years of bank records that tell a very different story than the one in his fundraiser. Out of love, I gave more than I ever should have. Out of self-preservation, I finally stopped. That is not cruelty. That is clarity." It didn't go viral, but it didn't need to. 2 of my nephews shared it. A woman from my church messaged me, saying her daughter had been following the situation and called it textbook manipulation. My cousin from Missouri commented, "Wow, I had no idea. We're behind you." Then Bryce responded, with silence. He didn't take the page down. He didn't post rebuttals. He just kept collecting donations until he started losing them. I checked the page later that week. A red banner had appeared across the top, "Campaign under review for potential misrepresentation." Carol whistled. "Karma's got good Wi-Fi." But the calls hadn't stopped. One from my former sister-in-law, one from a friend I hadn't spoken to in years. Each time, I explained, calmly, factually. Some believed me, some clearly didn't. You can always hear it in their voice, the way they linger on, "Are you sure this isn't just a misunderstanding?" It didn't matter. The truth didn't need a megaphone. It needed a backbone. One evening after dinner, I sat by the window with a glass of wine, watching the sunset drip orange and violet across the sky. That's when I opened the messages folder on my laptop. New notification. Subject, public inquiry. From reporter Jung at localtimespod.com. Body, Ms. Harper, I've been following your son's viral GoFundMe and came across your statement. I'd love the chance to hear your side for an article on elder care, family boundaries, and online fundraising abuse. Would you be willing to talk? I reread it 3 times, and I smiled. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every mother who'd been rewritten in someone else's story and was finally ready to write her own. The reporter arrived just after noon, a slim woman in a navy windbreaker with a leather notepad and a recorder tucked into her pocket. Her name was Jenna Young, and she looked young enough to be my granddaughter, but her eyes carried a weight that told me she'd covered harder stories than this. "I'm not here to sensationalize," she said as we sat down at my kitchen table. "But what you're going through, a lot of people quietly endure it. If you're ready, I think your voice could help." I took a sip of peppermint tea to calm my nerves and nodded. "I'm not trying to destroy my son," I said, "but I'm not going to be buried under his lies either." She clicked on the recorder. "Start wherever you want." So I did. I told her about the years, 7 to be exact, of rent payments made behind closed doors. How I'd watched Bryce go from a boy who cried at thunderstorms to a man who weaponized guilt like a scalpel. I showed her the folder I'd labeled Support, 2016 to present, every transaction, every birthday check, every forgotten favor. Jenna never interrupted, just listened, nodding, scribbling in her notebook. "And when did you say enough?" she asked. I looked down at my hands, tracing a callus near my thumb. When he told me I was dead weight. We sat in silence for a few seconds. Then she asked the question I hadn't expected. "Do you still love him?" I answered without flinching. "Love isn't the problem. It's the permission I gave it to hurt me." Her eyes widened slightly, and I knew she'd write that line down word for word. By the time she left, I felt like I'd emptied a room in my chest that had been crowded for years. The article went live the following Wednesday. The Price of Love When Family Becomes Financial Abuse. The subheading read, "A retired nurse breaks her silence about being gaslit by her only son and finds a different kind of freedom in the process. She didn't twist my words. She didn't pad them in pity or paint me as a victim. She told the truth. My truth." Within 24 hours, the story, hey, over 30,000 views. And Bryce's GoFundMe? Flagged. Frozen. Eventually, it vanished altogether, an empty shell where false sympathy used to live. I didn't celebrate, not outwardly, but I did sleep through the night for the first time in weeks. The next day, I pulled out an old wooden box I hadn't opened since my husband passed. Inside were the documents we'd written up together when we'd first talked about retirement, travel plans, college savings, and a half-finished idea he'd always talked about, a scholarship in his name for nursing students from single-parent households. I never had the heart to pursue it. Until now. I called the local community college and asked what it would take. They said $5,000 to launch, more to sustain it. "I'll double it," I said, "and I'll write the first application question myself." They laughed, surprised. I didn't. I named it the Michael Harper Memorial Scholarship, because my husband always believed that money was only valuable if it left a hand open behind it. That same week, Carol brought over a bouquet of yellow tulips and a bottle of wine. Guess who got an anonymous donation to her church's domestic recovery program? She teased. I raised an eyebrow. Let's just say, some women know how to give quietly. We clinked glasses, but peace doesn't stay unbothered forever. Saturday morning, I was pulling weeds in the front garden when I noticed a figure standing at the bottom of my walkway. Clipboard, sunglasses, slack-jawed stare. Bryce. Not the son I raised, but the man he'd become. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He raised the clipboard like it was a weapon. "I've got something for you," he said. My stomach knotted. A manila envelope. My name in bold. "You are being served." The envelope from the process server hadn't even cooled in my hands before I opened it at the kitchen table. Legal jargon spilled out in neat, smug rows. Bryce was suing me. For financial coercion. For elder neglect. For emotional damages caused by undue manipulation. I let out a sound between a laugh and a growl. The kind that comes when something is so absurd, you almost admire the audacity. I called my lawyer, Dean, the same one who'd helped me move the condo into the living trust. "He's accusing me of controlling his finances," I said, reading aloud. "He says I exploited him." There was a pause on the other end. Then, "We're going to need every receipt." I already had them. Dean met me in person 2 days later, files stacked like bricks in his arms. We spread them across my dining room table, bank statements, rent transactions, the 7-year ledger I'd begun in anger and finished in heartbreak. "He's claiming you misled him about the estate," Dean muttered, flipping through a folder. "That you led him to believe he had a legal stake in the condo." I pointed to a signed affidavit from 2 years ago. He knew. He just didn't like the answer. Witnesses came forward too. Carol, of course, who had seen the emotional leash he'd pulled on me for years. but also 2 of Bryce's ex-roommates, who'd watched me drop off groceries or pay utility bills from my own pocket when Bryce was too busy working on himself. Dean filed a countersuit. Defamation, malicious abuse of process, and emotional distress. Bryce refused to settle. "I want a jury to hear what she did," he declared at the preliminary hearing, voice rising, tears at the ready. I sat in the courtroom in a navy blazer I hadn't worn since Michael's funeral, stone still. Let him play the victim. I had documentation. I had time. I had nothing left to lose. Back home that night, something itched at the back of my brain. Not guilt, not grief. A question. What else didn't I know? I went into Michael's old office and started pulling drawers. The metal filing cabinet was nearly empty, just faded tax returns and a yellowed envelope marked "For H if needed." But behind it, tucked into a crevice, was something I hadn't seen in years. A small brass key, taped to the inside of the drawer wall. "Safety deposit box number 309, it read in Michael's careful script. My pulse kicked. I called the bank first thing the next morning. It took 2 forms of ID and a signature match, but finally, they handed me the box. Inside was a sealed letter and a folder of documents that smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. I opened the letter with shaking hands. "Helen, if you're reading this, it means the situation with Bryce has gone further than I hoped it ever would. I set this trust up years ago, not for him, but for who he might become. If he ever turned against you. These funds are earmarked for education, medical emergencies, or grandkids only. You decide what qualifies. Protect what's yours, and what's still worth saving. Love. Michael." I blinked fast to clear the blur. My fingers gripped the trust paperwork like rope thrown overboard. A second trust. Bryce had no idea it existed. The paper crackled under my fingertips like it had waited years to breathe. I sat in the bank's side room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Michael's letter spread out in front of me like a lifeline. My chest felt hollowed out, like I'd swallowed a truth too heavy to keep, but too righteous to spit back out. He'd seen this coming. Years ago. Quietly, carefully. Like the man he always was, he'd prepared not for what he hoped Bryce would become, but for what he feared he already was. I carried the folder straight to Dean's office, barely able to look away from the signatures. "There's a second trust," I told him, setting it down like a detonator. "Michael created it without telling me, for our future grandkids, not Bryce." Dean flipped through the paperwork, eyes widening behind his glasses. "This bypasses Bryce entirely, irrevocable. It's watertight." He paused, tapping the final page. "It's held in your name. You can control distributions as trustee." The irony hit me like a slap. I had felt powerless all these months, stripped down, used, disregarded, but right here, buried in a metal box, was a weapon I never knew I had, my voice, my protection, my power. "Can we move it into something safer?" I asked. "Somewhere he can't try to claw it apart?" Dean nodded. "I'll draft a protected family trust and transfer the assets immediately. He can scream all he wants. He has no legal standing here." That night, I walked the perimeter of my condo barefoot. The tile was cool under my feet. The air smelled like lemon oil and slow-set peace. I could almost hear Michael's voice in the hum of the fridge. "He won't change. But you can choose not to be his landing pad." I was done being a landing pad. Let him crash. The official paperwork for the transfer took 3 days. On the 4th, Dean called me while I was out watering the begonias. "We're good," he said. "It's locked in." I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just closed the garden hose valve and whispered, "Thank you." The next morning, I received the court notice. Trial date, 2 weeks from Thursday. And below that, scrawled in bold lettering, "Lead counsel for plaintiff, Miles Carter, S.K." I blinked. Miles Carter. Dean nearly spit his coffee when I read him the name. That guy's not a lawyer. He's a walking bar complaint. He rattled off the list. License suspended twice, known for targeting vulnerable elderly plaintiffs, last seen representing a man who tried to sue his sister over a bingo win at a senior center. I let the name sit in my mouth like spoiled wine. "He's either desperate or broke," I muttered. "Or both," Dean said. "But it plays in our favor. Judges don't take him seriously. We keep everything clean, we win this outright." I walked to the fireplace and pulled down a photo of Michael, the one taken during our trip to Oregon. He stood barefoot in the sand, salt spray in his hair, holding Bryce on his hip. The boy couldn't have been more than 5. "Why didn't you tell me about the second trust?" I whispered. Of course I knew the answer, because Michael knew I'd defend Bryce, even then, because he wanted to protect me from the guilt of choosing myself. Now, finally, I could choose, not for vengeance, not for punishment, for peace. 2 weeks later, the trial day came. The courthouse smelled like pine cleaner and old paper, but what I really noticed were the eyes. Not the judges, not the lawyers, the public gallery, strangers, women with notebooks, men with furrowed brows, people who recognized me from articles, podcasts, even that viral Facebook thread I hadn't meant to start. The trial hadn't even begun, and still, I felt like I was already on the stand. But not alone. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Someone held a cardboard sign, "Justice for Helen." I almost laughed. That used to be my secret wish, not justice, just acknowledgement. Now it had a hashtag. Inside, Bryce looked tired. He wore an ill-fitting navy blazer, probably borrowed. His new attorney, Miles Carter, looked like someone had rehydrated a used car salesman in a suit 2 sizes too tight. He whispered constantly, loud enough for everyone to hear. The judge arched an eyebrow at him before we even got through the preliminaries. Dean leaned over and whispered, "Don't worry. He's doing our job for us." The plaintiff's opening was melodramatic, rambling, and riddled with half-truths. Carter painted Bryce as a victim of emotional abandonment, of manipulated estate structures, and financial strangulation. Strangulation. The word echoed in my ears like a punchline from a cruel joke. When it was our turn, Dean calmly rolled out the receipts. 7 years of rent payments, car repairs, hospital bills, tuition deposits, Uber credits, every cent. Then he introduced letters from relatives, screen-captured texts, and a testimony from Carol, who told the court, "I've watched her give and give until it nearly erased her." Then came the surprise. A quiet knock on the back courtroom door, and in stepped Bryce's ex-girlfriend, Vanessa. I hadn't seen her in years, but I remembered her. Kind. Eyes, always offered to help clean up after family dinners, even when Bryce disappeared halfway through dessert. The judge allowed her statement. Vanessa cleared her throat and spoke, not to the court, but to Bryce. "You used to say your mom owed you because she was lucky to have a son who kept in touch," she began. "But I watched her. She didn't owe you. You drained her. You manipulated her grief. And when she stopped, you acted like she stole something." Bryce didn't look at her. Not once. When it was finally my turn to speak, I didn't have to dig deep. The words had been forming in me for years. "I was never a perfect mother," I began. "But I paid attention. I stayed up at night wondering how to afford groceries and rent for both of us. I gave my time, my home, my money, and my peace. I gave it freely, but love isn't a debt someone gets to collect with interest." I paused, letting the room settle. "And I didn't stop helping him because I stopped loving him. I stopped because I finally started loving myself." The gallery was silent. Then came a low wave of murmurs. One woman wiped her eyes. Even the bailiff nodded slightly. The judge took a recess. It lasted an hour. When we reconvened, she didn't waste time. "The plaintiff has not presented sufficient evidence of financial coercion. The documentation provided by the defendant is extensive, credible, and consistent. I rule in favor of the defendant." My knees nearly gave. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like days. But then the judge cleared her throat. "However, I am referring aspects of this case to the district attorney's office for potential investigation, fraudulent filings, misrepresentation, perjury." She looked directly at Bryce. "This courtroom may not be where this ends for you." Bryce's mouth opened, then closed. His lawyer paled. A beat of silence passed between them like smoke. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat, because I knew this wasn't vindication. It was just the first true consequence. The day I handed over the condo keys, I didn't cry. Not when the real estate agent called to confirm the sale. Not when I signed the last dotted line. Not even when I walked through the empty kitchen where Bryce used to leave crumbs and complaints in equal measure. I thought I'd mourn it. This space I'd poured my pension and patience into. But instead, I felt something closer to exhale. I had survived him. The proceeds from the condo wired into my account with a quiet ping. I watched the numbers update on my banking app like it meant something. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was proof that I had something left after him, something still mine. From that sum, I donated a portion, $50,000, to a transitional housing program for women over 50, the ones most people forget, the ones like me, the ones who'd stayed too long in silence. I want it to go to someone trying to build a life without guilt, I told the director on the phone. Her voice cracked as she thanked me. We don't get this kind of gift often, especially not anonymously. That was intentional. I didn't want a plaque. I wanted change. Next, I set up a living trust, not for Bryce, but for Clara, my niece. She was the first to defend me when Bryce's lies made it to Facebook. She checked in without asking for anything. She'd grown up with less and somehow learned how to love without expecting a payout. I'm stunned, she said when I told her. That's why it's yours, I replied. You don't think you're entitled to it. She cried. I didn't. That too felt like healing. Back at home, my new apartment, smaller and sunnier, I unpacked slowly. Just essentials. No relics. I didn't bring the framed photo of Bryce from his graduation. I didn't need reminders of the years I spent shaping his future while he chiseled away at mine. Instead, I framed a quote from my late husband's journal. Let your love be kind, but let your boundaries be steel. Bryce's accounts were frozen. Dean, my attorney, made sure of that. The GoFundMe money, what remained of it, was held for investigation. Bank statements showed his falsehoods. There were no medical bills from me, no unpaid rent, just fast food and vacations. I expected him to disappear. But that's not what Bryce does. A letter arrived days later, crisp white paper, no return address, the kind that looks legal just long enough to make your stomach knot. It was an appeal. He was claiming judicial bias, misrepresentation of financial facts. The words were technical, cold, but I knew them for what they were. Threats dressed in legalese, no apology, no recognition of harm, just the same demand. Give me more. I folded the letter once, pressed it flat on the table, then ran it through the shredder without hesitation. That night, I had tea with Carol on her porch. She'd brought lemon cookies and old stories. We laughed more than we spoke about the case. You finally look like you're breathing again, she said, handing me a cup. I am, I told her. We clinked mugs like champagne glasses. But the next morning, something changed. I stepped outside to water my small planter boxes, and there it was, an envelope tucked into my mailbox. No stamp, no address, just my name in rushed ink. Inside, a grainy photo. Me at the grocery store, leaning over the produce aisle. Scrawled in pen below the picture, "You still owe me." He messaged me from a new number. One last conversation, face to face, that's all I'm asking. The message landed at 1:02 a.m. while I was finishing the last chapter of a novel about a woman who'd faked her death just to escape her adult children. For a moment I laughed. Then I felt that old tug, the one that whispered, "He's still your son." But another voice, stronger now, rose up inside me. He's not the same boy you raised. He chose this. So I agreed, but on my terms. A public place. Noon. The downtown train station cafe. Cameras, witnesses, an exit. He was already there when I arrived, hunched at a table by the window, looking smaller somehow. His hoodie swallowed him whole. The man who once stormed through my home demanding what he was owed now stirred a cup of black coffee like it was the last thing anchoring him to the table. He looked up, surprised I showed. I sat across from him without removing my coat. My purse remained in my lap. "Hi, Mom," he said, voice brittle. I said nothing, just waited. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. It trembled in his hand as he slid it across the table. "My lawyer said if I withdraw the appeal, I can maybe still recover some housing support through mediation. If you'd be open to that." I didn't even look at it. "I'm not here to revisit the past," I said calmly. "I'm here to end the future." He blinked, lips parting in a way that used to break me. "But I'm your son. And I was your mother," I said, "right up until you put a price tag on my funeral." His jaw tensed. A crack appeared in the facade. The victim mask, the wounded boy performance, all of it strained under the weight of my resolve. "I was hurting," he tried. "You don't understand what it's like to feel abandoned by your own blood." "You mean like being sued by your child? Lied about online? Called dead weight after paying your rent for 7 years? He flushed red, anger rising, but boxed in. We weren't in private anymore. His rage had nowhere to land but back on him. "I made mistakes," he said finally. "But you cut me off like I never mattered." "You mattered," I said. "You just didn't respect it." He looked away, out the window. Across the street, a bus hissed to a stop and unloaded a crowd of school kids. Life going on, indifferent to the drama unraveling in a coffee shop corner booth. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small leather folder. "This is the deed," I said, laying it flat. "The property has been transferred. The trust is finalized. Your name is nowhere on it." He stared at it like I'd stabbed him. "You can't." "I already did." Silence ballooned between us. A waitress passed by, offering a refill. Neither of us responded. "I thought, one day you'd leave it to me," he said. "That's what Dad would have wanted." I stood, slow and steady. "Your father wanted legacy," I said, "not leverage." I left him there. Still seated, still stunned, still staring at a piece of paper that confirmed what he never believed possible, that I'd stopped needing his permission to be free. That night, I met with Dean in his office. The room smelled faintly of pine cleaner and old carpet, and the rain tapped on the window like it had something urgent to say. I signed the final trust documents with the same hand Bryce once accused of trembling. It didn't tremble now. It moved with clarity, with calm. Dean nodded. "It's done." I exhaled as if I hadn't breathed in weeks. "Then so is he," I said. I used to think distance was enough, that if I stopped answering his calls, blocked his number, deleted the memories like expired voicemails, the pain would fade too. But distance doesn't end a war. Legal clarity does. So I filed the paperwork. A permanent no-contact order, not just a restraining one. My attorney, a sharp woman named Vera with a voice like gravel and eyes that miss nothing, slid the papers across her oak desk. "This is more than protection," she said. "It's permission. To live again." I signed. My hand didn't shake. In those sterile county court halls where the air smells faintly of bleach and old coffee, I handed over every receipt, every text, every insult, brick by brick. Evidence that the bond had rotted from the inside. "Once filed," Vera said, "he won't be able to email, call, write, or step within 200 feet without facing charges." "And if he does?" I asked. Her lips curved into something close to satisfaction. "Then he learns that consequences aren't optional." When I left the courthouse, the rain had just stopped. The clouds hadn't cleared, but something inside me had. Carol was waiting in my kitchen when I got home. She had made lemon bars, too tart, but I never told her, and brought a single white candle in a thrifted glass holder. "We're celebrating," she said. "Celebrating what?" "Your divorce," she grinned, "from toxicity." I laughed, for real this time. It wasn't a loud laugh, more like the kind that bubbles up from the place where grief used to sit. The space was finally mine again. We clinked tea mugs. "To scissors," Carol toasted. "And steel." The next morning, the letters started arriving. Not from Bryce, from strangers. One woman in Vermont, another in Oklahoma, 2 from California, Women with handwriting that shook and pages that smelled like ink and perfume and old sorrow. They'd read the article, seen the interview clip, heard about the trust, the lawsuit, the son. He sounds like mine? I thought I was alone. You made me feel sane again. I sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees, reading them out loud to the wind like prayers. Some were angry, some heartbroken, but all of them came from places I knew too well. Kitchens filled with silence, bank statements covered in red ink, hospital visits where no one showed up. One letter read, "I finally told my son no yesterday. It was terrifying, but now I know I'm not the only mother learning to let go." I folded that one and tucked it into my kitchen drawer next to the teaspoons. Not everything had to be sacred to be saved. That afternoon, Carol brought over envelopes from her P.O. box. She said some women had found her address too. We sat with them spread across my dining table, overwhelmed. "You're not just surviving this," Carol said softly. "You're changing the map for all of us." I didn't respond, just reached out and squeezed her hand. At 3:11 p.m., my lawyer called. "Bryce has been served an official eviction," she said. "The landlord had already flagged his GoFundMe page after the fraud allegations. His lease was month to month." "Where is he now?" I asked, out of habit more than concern. "Not our problem anymore." I stood by the window, looking at the wet sidewalk, at the puddle reflecting the sky like it was trying to be more beautiful than it was. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just breathed. Because it was finally over. That night, as I rinsed dishes and hummed to the rhythm of my new life, a news alert popped up on my phone. Bryce Tanner's GoFundMe account officially frozen following investigation. His face stared back from the screen, eyes wide, unshaven, holding a cardboard sign on a busy corner. The caption read, "From inheritance to homelessness, his mother's betrayal cost him everything." The calendar flipped to May, and with it came the kind of sunlight that clung to everything it touched. Soft, quiet light that kissed the tops of my hydrangeas and filtered through the gauzy curtains of my new kitchen. Mother's Day was circled in faded ink, habit, not hope. But that morning I woke up without dread. No pit in my stomach, no restless pacing from room to room. I poured my coffee, humming under my breath, and for once, I didn't check my phone. Because this year I wasn't waiting for the apology that would never come, the guilt trip text, the carefully timed voicemail that sounded just sentimental enough to make me question everything all over again. Instead, I stepped outside barefoot, toes pressing into the dew-wet grass, and turned my face toward the sun. My little cottage sat on the edge of a cul-de-sac, flanked by dogwood trees and hummingbird feeders. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Every brick, every wall, every corner. Mine again. Carol had helped me find it. She called it a soft landing place. I called it a resurrection. Inside, the air smelled of lavender and lemon oil. A candle flickered on the bookshelf beside a photo of my late husband, his kind eyes frozen in a smile that had outlasted all our storms. I talked to him sometimes, just little updates. "Guess what?" I whispered, setting a rose in a mason jar beside the frame. I didn't wait for him this year. By June, I'd opened the doors to something bigger than myself, a folding table, a stack of clipboards, and a dozen chairs borrowed from the local library. That's how the first Financial Freedom for Elders session began. 12 women, different backgrounds, same ache in their stories. "My son took out a credit card in my name," one said, twisting a tissue in her hands. "My daughter forged my checks," whispered another. We talked interest rates, fraud alerts, and digital security. But we also talked about boundaries, worth, and the quiet dignity of saying no. I didn't teach from a textbook. I taught from bruises I'd let heal. Word spread. Within weeks, I had to find a bigger space. Bryce's name came up less and less in my mind. When it did, it was like seeing your childhood house in a dream. Familiar but distant, no longer yours. I didn't Google him, didn't ask around. Vera, my attorney, occasionally emailed with legal updates, but I'd asked her to keep them brief. One afternoon, while filing away documents, I came across the final copy of the no-contact order. I stared at the raised seal for a long time, then folded it gently and tucked it away in a fireproof box with my will. Closure doesn't always come with trumpets. Sometimes it's the sound of a door that doesn't slam. It just stops being opened. Carol came over one Sunday with fresh strawberries and 2 wine coolers. We sat in the backyard, legs propped on mismatched patio chairs. "He still hasn't tried to reach out?" she asked. I shook my head. "And you're okay with that?" I looked at the blue sky, at the way it held no secrets. "I'm more than okay," I said. "I'm whole." She nodded, then grinned. "You know, a few years ago, you would have defended him." "I know," I said. "That was before I learned that love doesn't mean setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm." Later that night, I wrote a letter. Not to Bryce, not for him. Just a letter. Maybe someday a woman like me would find it in a dusty library stack or a back corner of the internet. "This isn't a revenge story," I wrote. "It's a freedom one. I didn't cut him off to hurt him. I did it to stop hurting myself." I folded the page, pressed it between the covers of the journal I now used for gratitude instead of grief. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the wind chimes like a lullaby. I climbed into bed with a book in my lap and peace in my bones. For the first time in years, I didn't dream of the past. I just slept.